Senator Schiff, where is the evidence? The question hung in the air of the Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room like the reverberation of a gunshot in a canyon. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, rhythmic clicking of 100 camera shutters capturing the moment the world shifted on its axis. Adam Schiff, the newly elected senator from California and former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, froze. His hand was mid-air, reaching for a glass of water, but he stopped, as if paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the woman sitting across from him. This was supposed to be his arena. This was the Senate Hart Building, Room 219, a place of mahogany panels and velvet-lined traditions where nominees came to be grilled, humbled, and often destroyed by the political elite. Sitting at the witness table was Tulsi Gabbard, President Trump's nominee for Director of National Intelligence. She did not look like a woman about to be destroyed. She wore a dark navy suit that fit with military precision, a stark contrast to the rumpled energy of the legislators staring down at her. Her hands rested calmly on a stack of color-coded folders. There was no shaking, no nervous shuffling of papers, no deferential bowing of the head. She had the stillness of a soldier in the moments before a breach, focused, lethal, and absolutely ready. Schiff blinked, his confident, camera-ready smile faltering for the first time. "Excuse me," he stammered, looking around at his colleagues as if checking to see if they had heard the same impossibility. "Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard, we are here to discuss your nomination. I asked you about your judgment regarding Syria and your concerning statements about Russia. I didn't ask you a question about evidence." "I know what you asked, Senator," Tulsi replied, her voice steady and projecting clearly to the back of the packed gallery. "You are questioning my fitness to lead America's 18 intelligence agencies. You are questioning my loyalty to this country. You are implying, as you have for years, that I am somehow compromised by a foreign power." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto Schiff's. The movement was minimal, but the threat was palpable. "But you, Senator Schiff, have spent the last 6 years lying to the American people about intelligence. You have weaponized classified information. You have manufactured crises for political gain. So, before I answer your questions about my judgment, I think the American people deserve to see the receipts on yours." The room erupted. It wasn't a roar, but a sharp intake of breath followed by a wave of urgent whispers. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. On one side sat the veterans in dress uniforms, men and women who had served with Tulsi or respected her service, their faces grim and expectant. On the other side were the intelligence professionals, the spies and analysts who had watched their profession be dragged through the mud of cable news partisanship. And behind them, the press corps, reporters from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and the New York Times, leaning forward in their seats, sensing blood in the water. They had come expecting a standard confirmation beating. Instead, they were witnessing an execution. Schiff tried to recover the high ground, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Mr. Chairman," he appealed to the Republican chair, "this is highly irregular. The witness is not here to interrogate the committee." "The witness is here to address her qualifications," Tulsi interjected before the chairman could speak. "And part of being Director of National Intelligence is the ability to distinguish fact from fiction. It is the ability to identify disinformation. And, Senator, you are the single greatest source of disinformation in the United States Congress." With a deliberate, practiced motion, Tulsi opened the first folder in front of her. It wasn't a few sheets of paper. It was a dossier. Thick, tabulated, and devastating. I have your television appearances, she listed, her voice cold. I have your statements under oath. I have the classified transcripts from your own committee that you tried to hide. I have the Mueller report. I have the Durham report. All of it proving a pattern of deception that should disqualify you from sitting on this committee, let alone questioning my integrity. Schiff's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The ambush was total. He had prepared for a defensive witness, someone who would apologize for past tweets or try to nuance her foreign policy views. He had not prepared for a prosecutor. I'm going through it all, Tulsi continued, looking up at the monitors flanking the room where her aides were already projecting the first documents. Every lie, every leak, every abuse of power. Because if you are going to sit there and preach about national security, Senator, we are going to talk about how you betrayed it. The atmosphere in the room shifted from political theater to something raw and dangerous. This was the offensive defense, a strategy rarely seen in Washington, where decorum usually masked the knives. But Tulsi Gabbard wasn't playing by Washington rules. She was playing by combat rules. You don't wait for the enemy to shoot. You suppress the threat. Let's start with Russia, Tulsi said, pulling a specific document from the stack. And the evidence you claim to have for 3 years. The evidence that tore this country apart. The evidence that never existed. She looked at Schiff, who was now furiously whispering to his legal aide. Ready, Senator? Schiff didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked at the folder in her hands like it was a loaded weapon pointed at his chest. And in a way, it was. Let's start with the lie that started it all, Tulsi said, signaling to her aide. The Russia collusion hoax. The giant screens flanking the committee room flickered to life. The image was high definition and undeniable. Adam Schiff's face, younger, more confident, sitting in a CNN studio in March 2017. Tulsi didn't look at the screen. She kept her eyes on the man sitting 10 feet away from her. The audio filled the hearing room, echoing off the high ceilings. I can tell you that the case is more than circumstantial, the digital Schiff said, his voice dripping with gravitas. There is direct evidence of deception, and that is what we are investigating. The clip cut to another appearance. MSNBC, May 2017. The evidence is clear. There was collusion. I have seen evidence that is not circumstantial. Then ABC News, December 2017. I have seen direct evidence of collusion. It is in plain sight. The compilation ended, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. For 3 years, those sound bites had been the drumbeat of American politics. They had launched investigations, consumed news cycles, and convinced half the country that their president was a traitor. Tulsi picked up a heavy bound document from her table. It was the Mueller Report, Volume 1. March 2017, May 2017, December 2017. Tulsi recited the dates. You went on national television repeatedly and told the American people you had seen direct evidence of collusion. Not suspicion, not leads. Evidence. She held up the Mueller report. 2 years later, Special Counsel Robert Mueller released this report. He had a team of 19 lawyers, 40 FBI agents, 2,800 subpoenas, and unlimited resources. And on page 1, Volume 1, he concluded, the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. She dropped the book on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. So, Senator Schiff, here is my question. It is a simple one. The special counsel found no evidence. The FBI found no evidence. But you said you had direct evidence. You said you saw it personally. Tulsi leaned into the microphone. Where is it? Schiff shifted in his seat, his face pale but his eyes darting defensively. He tapped his microphone. Senator Gabbard, context is important here. If you look at the totality of the contacts— I am not asking about totality of contacts, Tulsi interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. I am asking about the word evidence. You are a lawyer, Senator. You know the difference between suspicious contact and evidence of a crime. You claim to have the latter. Where is it? I think if you look at the— Did you lie? Tulsi pressed, relentless. Or are you withholding evidence that the special counsel somehow missed? Schiff stammered, looking for an exit ramp. The Mueller report documented numerous contacts that were deeply concerning. Deeply concerning is not a crime, Tulsi snapped. Collusion is a specific charge. You said you had proof. You lied. She didn't let him recover. She reached for another document. And it wasn't just Mueller. Let's talk about Special Counsel John Durham. She held up the Durham report, released in May 2023. John Durham spent 4 years investigating the origins of the investigation you championed. And what did he find? He found that the FBI launched the investigation without, quote, appropriate predication. That means they had no evidence to start it. She flipped to a marked page. Durham specifically noted that certain officials had access to intelligence that contradicted their public statements. That's you, Adam. He's talking about you. Schiff tried to intervene. The Durham investigation was a partisan exercise that— It was a Department of Justice investigation, Tulsi shot back. And it concluded that the entire premise of your crusade was false. But you didn't just get it wrong, Senator. You knew it was wrong at the time. Tulsi opened a thinner folder now, but the contents were arguably more damning. These are the transcripts from your own committee, she said. The House Intelligence Committee. You fought to keep these classified for years. Republicans had to force their release. Now we know why. She picked up a sheet of paper. May 2017. Just days after you went on CNN and claimed you had evidence of collusion. You interviewed John Brennan, the former CIA director, behind closed doors. Under oath. She read from the transcript. Question: Mr. Director, do you have evidence of collusion, conspiracy, or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia? Answer: I don't know if I'd characterize it as collusion. I saw information and intelligence that was worthy of investigation. He didn't have evidence, Tulsi summarized. He had suspicions. She picked up another sheet. July 2017. James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence. Under oath. Question: Do you have evidence of collusion? Answer: I never saw any direct evidence of political collusion. Tulsi looked up, her expression radiating contempt. Your own witnesses, the heads of the intelligence community, told you under oath, to your face, that they had seen no direct evidence. And then you walked out of that secure room, stood in front of a CNN camera, and told the American people the exact opposite. That is not a difference of opinion, Senator, Tulsi said. That is a lie. A calculated, premeditated lie told from a position of authority to manipulate the public. I stand by my characterization of the risks, Schiff said weakly, his voice lacking the booming authority he usually commanded on cable news. You can characterize risks all you want, Tulsi said, but you cannot fabricate evidence. And that is what you did. You sat on the most powerful committee in Congress, holding the nation's secrets, and you used them to gaslight the country for 3 years. And the worst part, Tulsi added, closing the folder on Russia, is that while you were chasing phantoms, Real threats were being ignored. But we'll get to that. First, we need to talk about the warrant you defended. The one you knew was fake. She reached for the next folder, labeled FISA. The room was silent, watching the systematic dismantling of a career in real time. Schiff looked small in his chair, a man who had lived by the soundbite now dying by the transcript. You sat on the most powerful committee in Congress, holding the nation's secrets, and you used them to gaslight the country for 3 years, Tulsi Gabbard said, her voice echoing in the stunned silence of the hearing room. She moved the Russia folder to the side, revealing the next one in the stack. It was marked in bold red letters, FISA. But the lie about collusion wasn't enough for you, Tulsi continued. You had to defend the machinery used to spy on Americans based on that lie. Let's talk about the Carter-Page FISA warrant. Adam Schiff shifted his weight. This was technical ground, usually safe for him. He loved to get lost in the weeds of procedure. The FISA process is a critical tool for national security that includes rigorous oversight. Save the lecture, Tulsi cut him off. We know what the process is supposed to be. We are here to talk about what you said it was versus what it actually was. She pulled out a document, holding it up for the cameras. In early 2018, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee at the time, Devin Nunes, released a memo. It warned the American people that the FBI had abused the FISA process to spy on the Trump campaign. It claimed the warrant relied heavily on the Steele dossier, a collection of unverified opposition research funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign. Tulsi looked at Schiff. You responded with your own memo, the Schiff memo. You went on every network to defend the FBI. You called the Nunes memo a distortion. You said the FBI's warrant application was properly predicated. You assured the public that the Steele dossier was just a small part of the evidence. She dropped the document and picked up a heavy, bound report with the seal of the Department of Justice. December 2019, Inspector General Michael Horowitz releases his report on the Carter-Page FISA warrant. She opened the report to a bookmarked page. The IG found 17 significant errors or omissions in the warrant applications. 17. And every single one of them went in one direction: to justify spying on Carter-Page. The IG found that the FBI relied entirely on the Steele dossier. Without it, there was no probable cause. You said it was a small part. That was a lie. The IG found that the FBI failed to tell the court that the Clinton campaign paid for the dossier. You said the court was aware. That was misleading. But here is the smoking gun, Senator, Tulsi said, pulling out a page of heavily redacted notes that had been declassified for this hearing. January 2017. The FBI interviews Christopher Steele's primary subsource, Igor Danchenko. This is the man who supposedly gave Steele the intel about Trump and Russia. Do you know what Danchenko told the FBI? Tulsi asked, looking directly at Schiff. Schiff remained silent, his jaw tight. He told them it was bar talk. The phrase hung in the air. He told the FBI that the information in the dossier was rumor, speculation, and conversation over beers. He said Steele had exaggerated it. The FBI knew in January 2017 that their primary evidence was garbage. You had access to this information, Senator, Tulsi pressed. You were briefed on the underlying intelligence. You knew the FBI's own source had debunked the dossier. And yet, a year later, in 2018, you wrote a memo defending it. You went on TV and called it credible. Why? I relied on the representations of the Justice Department, Schiff said, his voice tight. You are the Oversight Committee, Tulsi shot back. Your job isn't to rely on them. Your job is to check them. But you didn't want to check them because their lies served your narrative. You were happy to let the FBI spy on a presidential campaign using Russian disinformation because it helped your political party. That is the definition of corruption, Tulsi said. And speaking of corruption, let's talk about how that false narrative got into the press in the first place. Tulsi reached for the next folder. This one was thinner but contained data that was far more precise. Phone records and timelines. We've talked about your lies, Tulsi said. Now let's talk about your leaks. Leaking classified information is a felony, Senator. It endangers lives. It compromises what we call sources and methods, the human beings and technical systems we use to gather intelligence. She signaled her aide. A timeline appeared on the large screens. The pattern. January 15, 2018, 10 hours a.m. The House Intelligence Committee receives a classified briefing on the Russia investigation. 12:30 p.m. The committee goes into a closed session. 5:47 p.m. Phone records show a 17-minute call from your personal cell phone to a reporter at CNN. 11 p.m. CNN publishes a story containing exclusive details from that morning's classified briefing, citing officials familiar with the matter. Schiff scoffed, trying to regain his footing. I talk to reporters all the time. That proves nothing. If it were once, maybe, Tulsi countered. But I have 47 instances here, Senator. 47 times where a classified briefing led by you was followed within hours by a call to a major media outlet, followed immediately by a story leaking the exact information you just heard. You were a pipeline, Tulsi said. You were taking secrets entrusted to you by the intelligence community and feeding them to the press to shape public opinion. She pulled out a document stamped secret, though the relevant paragraphs had been declassified for the hearing. This is a damage assessment from the CIA regarding leaks during your tenure as chairman. She read from the page. Multiple unauthorized disclosures of sources and methods required changes to collection practices. At least 2 human intelligence sources had to be relocated due to compromised information appearing in U.S. media. Liaison relationships with 2 foreign intelligence services were damaged. The room went quiet. The veterans in the gallery stared at Schiff with open hostility. They knew what it meant to relocate a human source. It meant an asset, a person risking their life for America, had been burned. Real people were put in danger because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, Tulsi said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Because getting the headline was more important to you than protecting the asset. Let's look at one specific example. July 2017, Donald Trump Jr.'s emails. Your committee obtained these emails under subpoena. They were not public. They were sensitive evidence in an ongoing investigation. July 11, 2017. Your committee receives the documents at 9:00 a.m. 2:00 p.m. You call CNN. 6:00 p.m. CNN breaks the story, claiming exclusive access to the emails. But here is the kicker, Tulsi said. CNN reported that the sources were on the Democratic side of the committee. They didn't even try to hide it. And what did you do that night? Tulsi asked. You went on CNN, the same network you leaked to, and discussed the emails you had just provided them. You analyzed the evidence that you had illegally disclosed. That is a closed loop of corruption, Senator. You leak the intel, they print the story, and then you go on air to comment on the story you planted. I dispute the characterization that Schiff began. You can dispute gravity if you want, Adam, but you're still sitting in a chair, Tulsi said. The phone records don't lie. The timelines don't lie. The CIA damage assessment doesn't lie. You weaponized the free press, Tulsi concluded, closing the folder. You turned journalists into stenographers for your political operation. And in doing so, you compromised the safety of this nation. But leaking wasn't enough, she said, reaching for the next stack. Sometimes, the truth tried to get out on its own. And when that happened, you didn't just leak, you censored. She pulled out the folder labeled The Laptop. Let's talk about October 2020, she said, and the greatest election interference operation in modern history. Tulsi Gabbard reached for the next folder. It was marked October 2020 in bold black letters. We have discussed your lies about Russia, Tulsi said, her voice steady and echoing through the hushed committee room. We have discussed your leaks that endangered intelligence assets. But leaks and lies are one thing. Using the weight of your office to censor a true story weeks before a presidential election is something else entirely. It is election interference. She signaled her aide. A timeline appeared on the massive screens flanking the room. The laptop. Let's go back to October 2020, Tulsi began. 3 weeks before the presidential election. The New York Post, one of the oldest newspapers in this country, published a story about a laptop belonging to Hunter Biden. It contained emails detailing business dealings in Ukraine and China, raising serious questions about influence peddling. Senator Schiff, she said, turning to him, do you remember what you told the American people about that laptop? Schiff shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing. I expressed my concern that it had the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. You didn't express concern, Tulsi corrected him sharply. You stated it as fact. She played the clip. CNN, October 16, 2020. Wolf Blitzer. Does this smell like Russian disinformation to you? Adam Schiff. We know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. Clearly, the origins of this whole smear are from the Kremlin, and the president is only too happy to have Kremlin help to amplify it. The clip ended. Clearly from the Kremlin, Tulsi repeated. We know that. Those are definitive statements, Senator. You didn't say, it might be. You didn't say, we should investigate. You told millions of viewers that it was a Russian operation. She pulled out a document from the folder. Here is the problem. The FBI had taken possession of that laptop in December 2019, 10 months before you went on CNN. By the time you sat in that studio, the FBI had already verified its authenticity. They knew it was real. They knew it wasn't Russian. And as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, you had oversight of the FBI. You had access to those briefings. Tulsi leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. So, we have two possibilities. Option 1. The FBI hid this critical information from the chairman of the Intelligence Committee for 10 months, which would mean you were completely negligent in your oversight duties. Or, Option 2. You knew the laptop was real, and you lied to the American people to protect your preferred candidate. Which is it, Senator? Were you incompetent, or were you corrupt? Schiff tried to interrupt. The intelligence community assessment at the time. There was no assessment. Tulsi slammed her hand on the table, the sound cracking like a whip. That is the lie you keep telling. The director of national intelligence at the time, John Ratcliffe, explicitly stated there was no intelligence supporting the Russian disinformation theory. You made it up. And then you orchestrated the cover-up, she continued. You helped coordinate the infamous Letter of 51. 51 former intelligence officials who signed a letter saying the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian operation. She held up the letter. We interviewed the signatories, Senator. Michael Morell, the former acting CIA director, testified that he organized this letter to give the Biden campaign a talking point. He admitted he hadn't seen the laptop. He admitted he had no evidence. It was a political operation dressed up as an intelligence assessment. And you used that letter, Tulsi said. You waved it around on television like it was the gospel. And because of you, because the chairman of the Intelligence Committee called it Russian disinformation, Twitter locked the New York Post's account. Facebook throttled the story. The media refused to cover it. You used the credibility of the intelligence community to censor a factual news story that voters had a right to see, Tulsi said. That is not protecting democracy, Senator. That is rigging an election. She looked at the veterans in the gallery. In the military, we call that a psychological operation, a psyop. Usually, we run them against foreign enemies. You ran one against the American people. The laptop was real, she concluded, closing the folder. The emails were real. The money from China was real. The only thing that was fake was you. Tulsi moved the laptop folder to the growing stack of damning evidence. The table in front of her looked like a prosecutor's desk at a mafia trial. She reached for the next folder, labeled Surveillance. We've talked about how you lied to the public, Tulsi said. Now let's talk about how you weaponized your committee to attack your enemies in private. Oversight powers are given to Congress to check the executive branch, she explained for the audience. They are not given to you to stalk your political rivals, but that is exactly what you did. She pulled out a spreadsheet. It was a list of subpoenas issued by the House Intelligence Committee in December 2019. During the impeachment inquiry, you issued subpoenas for phone records, Tulsi said. But you didn't just subpoena witnesses. You subpoenaed the phone records of a sitting member of Congress, Devin Nunes, the ranking member of your own committee. The room murmured. Spying on a colleague was a breach of protocol so severe it was almost unheard of. You secretly obtained the call logs of the top Republican on the Intelligence Committee, Tulsi said. You wanted to know who he was talking to. You wanted to know his sources. You treated a fellow congressman like a terror suspect. I followed the evidence where it led, Schiff said defensively. You spied on the opposition, Tulsi shot back. And it didn't stop there. You subpoenaed the phone records of John Solomon, an investigative journalist, a member of the Free Press. She held up a copy of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press, Tulsi read. That includes the right of journalists to protect their sources. But you used your subpoena power to map out a reporter's communications because you didn't like his reporting on the Russia hoax. And then, she added, you subpoenaed the personal attorney of the President of the United States. You shattered attorney-client privilege. Congressman, journalist, lawyer, Tulsi listed them off. You targeted the three pillars of checks and balances. You used the unlimited power of the state to track the communications of anyone who dared to question your narrative. She looked at the senators on the dais. If the CIA did this to a journalist, we would hold hearings. If the FBI did this to a congressman, heads would roll. But Adam Schiff did it from the chair of the Intelligence Committee, and he called it oversight. And that brings us to June 2023, Tulsi said. She pulled out a document printed on heavy congressional cardstock. House Resolution 521. The House of Representatives voted to censure you, Adam Schiff. A formal condemnation for your conduct. Only 25 members in the history of the United States have been censured. You are one of them. And it wasn't just a party line vote, Tulsi noted. The final vote was 213 to 209. It stands as a permanent mark of shame on your record. Speaker Kevin McCarthy went further, Tulsi said. He removed you from the House Intelligence Committee. He stated publicly that you had lied so many times, you could no longer be trusted with the nation's secrets. Tulsi stood up now, towering over the witness table. And that brings me to my question for this committee, she said, turning to address the senators sitting on the elevated platform. The House of Representatives determined that Adam Schiff is too dishonest to sit on their Intelligence Committee. He was censured for misleading the public. He was stripped of his committee assignments because he is a security risk. She pointed a finger at Schiff. So why is he sitting here? The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Why is a man who was deemed unfit for intelligence oversight by the House now sitting on the Senate Intelligence Committee? Tulsi asked. Why does he still have a security clearance? Why is he allowed to question anyone about integrity when his own colleagues officially declared he has none? She turned back to Schiff, her voice quiet but devastating. You aren't an overseer, Senator. You are the abuse we need oversight for. Schiff looked around the room, but he found no allies. The Democrats on the panel were looking down at their notes, unwilling to make eye contact. The Republicans were staring at him with open disgust. He was isolated. He was exposed. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that she still had one folder left. The one marked impeachment. Tulsi Gabbard moved the surveillance folder to the discard pile. The table in front of her was now a chaotic landscape of exposed secrets, but she kept the space directly in front of her clear for the final, thickest binder. We have established your pattern, Tulsi said, her voice echoing in the stillness of the hearing room. Lying about Russia, leaking classified intel, censoring the laptop, spying on colleagues. But all of those abuses were just the warm-up act for your grand finale. She placed the last folder on the desk. Impeachment. You led 2 impeachment efforts against a sitting president, Tulsi said. The most solemn power the Constitution grants to Congress. You turned it into a partisan weapon. And to do it, you didn't just twist the truth. You fabricated evidence. She signaled her aide. A transcript appeared on the screen. It was the rough transcript of the July 25, 2019 call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. The parody. September 26, 2019, Tulsi recited. You opened the first impeachment hearing. The eyes of the world were on you, and you purported to read the transcript of the president's call. You looked into the camera and said, I have a favor I want from you, though. I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it. You said, I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. Tulsi paused. Those words do not appear in the transcript, Senator. You made them up. I was engaging in parody, Schiff interrupted, his voice tight. I was characterizing the essence of the call. You were the chairman of the Intelligence Committee in an impeachment hearing, Tulsi shouted, her composure cracking into righteous anger for the first time. It wasn't an open mic night at a comedy club. You were presenting evidence to the American people, and you fabricated a conversation that never happened to frame a president for a crime he didn't commit. You didn't say it was parody before you read it, Tulsi noted. You only called it parody after you got caught. That is the behavior of a con artist, not a statesman. She flipped the page. And then there was the quid pro quo. You built the entire case on the claim that aid was withheld to force an investigation. But there was a problem with your timeline. President Zelensky didn't know the aid was withheld when the call happened. How can you be blackmailed with a threat you don't know exists? And when your star witness, Ambassador Kurt Volker, testified behind closed doors that there was no quid pro quo, what did you do? You hid the transcript, Tulsi answered herself. You kept Volker's exculpatory testimony classified for weeks while you went on TV and claimed the opposite. You manipulated the evidence to drive a narrative that you knew was false. That is not justice, Senator. That is a frame job. She moved to the second impeachment. January 6th. You served as an impeachment manager. You stood on the floor of the Senate and presented video evidence against the president. But, once again, you couldn't rely on the actual facts. You had to doctor the evidence? Tulsi held up a screenshot. You presented a text message from a Trump supporter to the White House. You claimed it showed a plot to overturn the election, but you cropped the text. You cut off the part where the person said, "I want to see the legal process play out." You edited the evidence to reverse its meaning, Tulsi said. In a court of law, you would be disbarred for that. In the military, you would be court-martialed. But in Congress, you were applauded. You have a God complex, Senator, Tulsi said, leaning back. You believe that your truth is so important that you can lie, cheat, leak, and fabricate to achieve it. You believe the ends justify the means. But in intelligence, the means are everything. If we can't trust the evidence, we can't trust the agency. And that, she said, looking him in the eye, is why you can never be allowed near a classified document again. The weight of the evidence on the table was physical. The Russia lies, the FISA abuse, the leaks, the censorship, the spying, the impeachment fabrications. It was a monument to corruption, built brick by brick over 6 years. Tulsi Gabbard stood up. She didn't need the microphone anymore. Her voice carried the command authority of a field commander. Senator Schiff, she said, we have spent the last 4 hours reviewing your record. I have shown you the documents. I have played you the clips. I have read you the transcripts. So I have one final question for you. It is a simple question. It doesn't require context. It doesn't require a classified briefing. She walked around the witness table, standing in the well of the committee room, facing him directly. Have you ever told the truth? The room went deathly silent. About anything? Tulsi pressed. About the evidence you claimed to have? About the whistleblower you claimed you didn't know? About the laptop? About the leaks? Can you point to a single major controversy in the last 6 years where you didn't lie to the American people? Schiff stared at her. For the first time in his career, he had no talking point. The sheer volume of the proof she had laid out made denial impossible. To say yes would be laughable. To say no would be a confession. I have always acted in accordance with my oath to protect the Constitution, Schiff finally managed, his voice robotic. Your oath? Tulsi laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. You took an oath to protect classified information. You leaked it. You took an oath of candor. You fabricated evidence. You took an oath to the Constitution. You trampled the Fourth Amendment rights of Carter Page and the First Amendment rights of John Solomon. You violated every oath you ever took, Tulsi said. She turned to the committee dais, addressing the other senators. Mr. Chairman, senators, I have a question for you. Adam Schiff was censured by the House of Representatives. He was stripped of his Intelligence Committee assignment by the Speaker because he could not be trusted. His own colleagues, people who worked with him every day, determined he was a security risk. She pointed back at Schiff. Why is a man who was fired from the House Intelligence Committee for lying allowed to sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee? Why does he still hold a security clearance? Why is he allowed to question my integrity when his own has been shattered into 1,000 pieces? The senators shifted uncomfortably. It was the question everyone in Washington had whispered, but no one had dared to ask. This man is not an overseer, Tulsi said. He is the danger. She walked back to her table and began stacking her folders. Snap, snap, snap. The sound was like a gavel coming down. I am done answering his questions, Mr. Chairman, Tulsi said, because a liar has no standing to question the truth. I will answer questions from anyone else on this committee, but I will not participate in a charade with a man who has made a career out of destroying this institution. She sat down, crossed her hands, and waited. The gallery erupted. It started with a single clap from a veteran in the back row, and then it spread like wildfire. Applause, cheers, a standing ovation from the people who had watched their country be torn apart by the very lies Tulsi had just exposed. The chairman banged his gavel furiously. Order! Order in the committee! But it was too late. The spell was broken. Adam Schiff sat frozen, a man who had spent years hunting monsters only to have a mirror held up to his face and realize he was the monster all along. The warrior had met the weasel, and the weasel had nowhere left to hide. The hearing adjourned at 2:15 p.m. By 2:30 p.m., the Internet had detonated. It wasn't just a political news cycle, it was a digital tsunami. The video of Tulsi Gabbard systematically dismantling Adam Schiff didn't just circulate, it saturated every corner of the online world. Clip 1, Tulsi asking, "Have you ever told the truth?" and Schiff sitting in paralyzed silence. That 10-second clip hit 5 million views in the first hour. It was shared by veterans, by libertarians, by conservatives, and even by disaffected liberals who had grown tired of the Russia narrative. The silence was deafening. It was the sound of a career ending in real time. Clip 2, the laptop segment. Tulsi holding up the timeline proving the FBI had authenticated the laptop 10 months before Schiff called it Russian disinformation. You helped censor a true story about a presidential candidate. That clip was being retweeted by Elon Musk, by Joe Rogan, by members of the House Judiciary Committee. It wasn't just a gotcha moment, it was proof of election interference. Clip 3, the leaking timeline. 47 instances of classified briefings followed by calls to CNN. This was the one that enraged the intelligence community. In private signal chats and closed forums, current and former spies were cheering. Finally, one retired CIA officer tweeted, "Someone said it. He burned us for years." By 5 p.m., the hashtag #YurChi Schiff lied was the #1 trend globally. Tulsi Gabbard was #2. Warrior V's Weasel was #3. Adam Schiff's office tried to stop the bleeding. They issued a statement at 4:45 p.m., but it was weak, filled with the same bureaucratic jargon that Tulsi had just exposed. Senator Schiff stands by his record of holding the Trump administration accountable. Today's hearing was a partisan stunt designed to distract from the nominee's concerning record on Syria and Russia. The statement fell flat. It was drowned out by the sheer volume of evidence Tulsi had presented. You couldn't spin a timeline. You couldn't gaslight a transcript. The comments under Schiff's post were a massacre of memes, screenshots of his face during the hearing, and demands for his resignation. Even the mainstream media, The very apparatus that had protected Schiff for years found itself in a trap. They couldn't ignore the hearing because it was too big. They couldn't dismiss it as right-wing misinformation because Tulsi had used official government documents, Inspector General reports, and Schiff's own words. CNN, the network that Schiff had leaked to for years, was forced to cover it. The segment was awkward. "A contentious confirmation hearing today," the anchor said, looking uncomfortable. Nominee Tulsi Gabbard turned the tables on Senator Schiff, presenting a series of allegations regarding his past statements. While Schiff disputed the characterization, the documents presented do raise questions about the discrepancy between his public statements and the classified record. It was a tepid admission, but for CNN, it was an earthquake. They were admitting, however grudgingly, that their favorite source might have lied to them. MSNBC tried to focus on the decorum of the hearing, arguing that Tulsi had violated Senate norms, but their legal analyst, visibly pained, admitted, "The timeline regarding the Hunter Biden laptop and the FBI's authentication is difficult for Senator Schiff to explain away. The dates don't line up with his public statements." The New York Times ran a fact-check piece titled, "Assessing Gabbard's Claims Against Schiff." They wanted to rate them false. They tried. But on every major point, the Russia collusion evidence, the FISA errors, the laptop verification, they had to rate them true or mostly true. They couldn't rewrite history when Tulsi had brought the receipts. The political fallout was immediate. In California, Schiff's home turf, the ground was shifting. A tracking poll conducted by a local news station showed his approval rating cratering. 2 weeks ago, he was at 54%. The morning after the hearing, he was at 38%. Among independents, he had dropped to 29%. The comments from his own constituents were brutal. "I voted for him because I thought he was protecting democracy," one woman told a reporter in Los Angeles. "Now I find out he was the one undermining it? He lied to us." By the next morning, the legal consequences began to materialize. The ethics complaints. 3 separate ethics complaints were filed with the Senate Ethics Committee before noon. One was from a nonpartisan government watchdog group, citing the evidence of leaking classified information. The timeline presented by Director-designate Gabbard establishes a prima facie case of unauthorized disclosure of classified material. The complaint read, "The Senate cannot ignore evidence that a member is compromising national security for media attention." Another complaint came from a press freedom organization, citing the subpoenas of journalists' phone records. Senator Schiff used his committee powers to spy on the free press. This is a violation of the First Amendment and Senate rules. The third came from a group of retired intelligence officers. They demanded his security clearance be suspended pending an investigation into the 47 leaks. Schiff was isolated. In the Senate cloakroom, Democratic colleagues avoided eye contact. They knew the score. They knew that defending him now meant tying themselves to a sinking ship. He had become toxic. The man who had once been the face of the party was now a liability. The most damning reaction, however, came from the intelligence community itself. Late that night, an open letter began circulating. It wasn't signed by 51 former officials looking for a job. It was signed by rank-and-file veterans, analysts, and field officers. "For years, we have watched our work be politicized," the letter read. "We have watched intelligence be twisted to fit narratives. We have watched our sources be endangered by leaks from Capitol Hill. Today, Tulsi Gabbard spoke for us. She exposed the rot. We stand with her." Schiff sat in his office, watching the cable news coverage loop his humiliated silence over and over again. He had built his career on the idea that he was the prosecutor, the man who hunted down corruption. Now, he was the defendant. And the prosecutor was a woman who didn't care about his title, his tenure, or his media connections. She only cared about the truth. The hearing hadn't just secured her nomination. It had destroyed his legacy. The narrative had flipped. The hunter had become the hunted. And as the sun set on Washington, D.C., everyone knew that the vote the next day wasn't really about Tulsi Gabbard anymore. It was about whether the Senate had the courage to ratify the verdict she had just delivered. The next morning, the Senate Intelligence Committee met in a closed session to vote on the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard. The mood in the room was somber. The echoes of the previous day's devastation still lingered in the mahogany-paneled chamber. Adam Schiff was there, but he was a ghost. He sat at the end of the dais, pale and silent. He didn't offer a speech. He didn't try to rally the Democrats to block the nomination. He knew it was over. To speak now would only invite more humiliation. The chairman called the roll. Mr. Rubio? Aye. Mr. Cotton? Aye. Mr. Cornyn? Aye. The Republicans were unanimous. They supported her not just because she was Trump's pick, but because she had done what none of them had been able to do. She had broken the media's protective seal around Schiff. Then came the Democrats. Mr. Warner? No. Mr. Wyden? No. It was expected to be a party-line rejection. But then the clerk called the name of a moderate Democrat from a swing state, a senator facing a tough re-election who had watched the viral clips and read the polls. Senator Manchin? There was a pause. Joe Manchin looked at Schiff, then down at his hands. Aye. A gasp went through the room. Then another. A Democrat from a red state, deeply connected to the military community. The final tally was 9-6. 2 Democrats had crossed the aisle. They issued a joint statement immediately after the vote. While we have concerns about some of Lieutenant Colonel Gabbard's past policy statements, her performance yesterday demonstrated a commitment to transparency and accountability that the intelligence community desperately needs. She has served honorably, and she deserves a vote on the floor. The nomination moved to the full Senate floor. The debate lasted 2 days, but the energy had shifted. The Democrats tried to attack her record on Syria, but every time they did, the Republicans played a clip of Schiff lying about Russia. It was a checkmate. You couldn't attack her judgment without defending his lies, and no one wanted to defend his lies. The final vote, 52-48. Tulsi Gabbard was confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence. She was the first woman to hold the position, the first veteran of the global war on terror, and the first former Democrat to be appointed by a Republican president to such a high-ranking national security role. President Trump issued a statement from the White House. Congratulations to Tulsi Gabbard, an American patriot and combat veteran, on her confirmation as DNI. Finally, we have someone who will end the weaponization of our intelligence agencies and restore integrity to the intelligence community. Her performance during the confirmation hearing showed exactly why I nominated her. She stands up to liars. She presents facts. She serves America, not the party. Congratulations, Tulsi. The swearing-in ceremony took place 3 days later at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It was a stark departure from the pomp and circumstance of previous administrations. There were no cocktail parties, no lobbyists, no media circus. The room was filled with the people who actually did the work: case officers, analysts, military liaisons, and technical experts. Tulsi stood on the stage, wearing a dark suit, with a miniature pin of her military rank on the lapel. She placed her hand on a Bible held by her husband. I, Tulsi Gabbard, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Her voice was clear, carrying the same steel that had silenced the Senate hearing room, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. When the oath was finished, she stepped to the podium. She didn't look like a politician. She looked like a commanding officer addressing her troops. For too long, Tulsi began, this building and the agencies connected to it have been used as pawns in a political game. Intelligence was weaponized to target political opponents. Secrets were leaked to shape narratives. The trust of the American people was broken. She looked out at the sea of faces, the spies and the soldiers who had been waiting for leadership. That ends today. The weaponization ends today. The leaking ends today. The lying ends today. We are here to protect the United States, not to police its politics. We are here to provide the unvarnished truth to the President and the people, not to manufacture consent for wars or investigations. We protect sources. We protect methods. We protect the Constitution. That is our job, and we are going to do it. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It was a release of years of frustration from professionals who despised what their leaders had become. Meanwhile, across town, the split screen told the final chapter of the story. On MSNBC, Adam Schiff was giving an interview. He looked smaller than usual, his face drawn, his eyes tired. The chyron beneath him read, "Senator Schiff responds to confirmation." This was a partisan attack, Schiff was saying, his voice lacking its usual conviction. It was designed to distract from the real issues. I stand by my record of... But the host interrupted him. Senator, she presented specific evidence of contradictions. The dates on the laptop, the FISA errors. How do you explain those? Schiff stammered. He fell back on context and complexity. But for the first time, the media wasn't buying it. He looked defensive. He looked guilty. He looked like the past. On the other side of the screen, Tulsi was shaking hands with the rank and file at Langley, smiling, looking like the future. The contrast was absolute. The warrior had met the weasel. The truth had met the lie. Service had met corruption. And in the end, the receipts had won. Adam Schiff would remain in the Senate, but he was a diminished figure, a man with a title, but no authority. His power, which relied on the illusion of integrity, had evaporated the moment Tulsi asked the question he couldn't answer. Tulsi Gabbard walked into the SIF as the Director of National Intelligence. She had a job to do. She had a bureaucracy to clean up. She had a country to protect. And she had proven on the national stage that the most powerful weapon in Washington wasn't a leak or a lie. It was the truth.